I have been using iAPS, the DIY automated insulin delivery system for iPhones, for 3 months, and I'm ready to share my experience. iAPS uses an algorithm called OREF1. This algorithm has unannounced meal technology and dynamic settings that adjust every 5 minutes based on the last 2 weeks and 24 hours. These are just a few features that make iAPS one of the strongest systems available, but there's a catch. It's not FDA cleared and you must build the app yourself. Welcome to Diabetic. I'm Justin. I have type 1 diabetes, and on this show, I talk all things diabetes tech, news, and management with industry leaders, educators, and those thriving with diabetes. Today, I'm bringing on YouTuber Pete Wilkins to talk to me about his experience getting on iAPS and using it for the last 2 months. Pete is a T1D of 13 years living in London. His YouTube channel has tutorials on live streaming, content creation, and he helps people grow their audience on live streaming platforms. There's a link to his channel in today's show notes. Today, the two of us get into what's working for us on iAPS and the features and settings that we like, as well as what we think could be better and what we hope to achieve moving forward. We also get into some of the drama going on with iAPS right now and their community, as some are unhappy with the direction developers are taking it and say the latest main version may not be safe and doesn't really feel open source anymore. To get a better understanding of how iAPS's algorithm works, check out the episode where I spoke with two admins of the iAPS Facebook group, as well as the website. I've linked both of those in today's show notes. Keep in mind that anything you hear on this podcast or content on any of my pages is not medical advice. Always consult with your physician before making changes to your healthcare. iAPS is experimental and not approved by the FDA or regulatory authorities. You take full responsibility for building and using iAPS, and you do so at your own risk. Now, a quick word from our sponsor. Today's episode is sponsored by T1D Exchange. You can directly make an impact on diabetes healthcare, treatments, and technology by participating in the T1D Exchange registry. It starts with a simple survey about your life with T1D, and it only takes about 15 minutes. After that, you'll have a personal portal with ongoing T1D study and survey opportunities. Plus, some of these studies even offer compensation. Signing up with the link in the show notes helps support my channel, and it allows me to continue putting out free content. You can sign up at t1dexchange.org/diabetic or click that link in today's show notes. Pete, thank you so much for coming on the show. I am excited to talk to you about the iAPS. A lot of my listeners have been waiting a while to hear my thoughts on it. And I've been on it for 3 months now, and it didn't feel right until recently to talk about it because I wanted to make sure that I felt comfortable with it before even sounding remotely educated about it. But I'm excited to have this conversation with you. How long have you been on it?
A little bit less than you. So probably coming up to about a month and a half to 2 months. But I've been really tinkering with it. Trying not to change anything more than one thing a day, but like really trying to understand how the algorithm works and all the different controls, because it's been a big shift for me. Obviously, you came from Loop to iAPS, so at least you had like some experience of Omnipod and of like a kind of hybrid closed loop system. For me, I've been on Medtronic pumps, so tubed pumps, for 12 years. I've been diabetic for 13, so very quickly moved on to a tube system. And their way of doing things is kind of just carb counting and like a bolus wizard. So it knows what blood sugar you want to end up at and how many carbs you've eaten, and it tries to get you back there. But it's not doing anything in terms of temp basals or giving these super micro boluses or anything like that. It's a very simple system. So yeah, it was kind of a lot of relearning about my own diabetes over the past sort of 2 months. But it's been a great experience.
Yeah, and you were on Medtronic's. Which pump were you on? Were you on an automated system before iAPS?
No. So I mean, okay. I think in the 12 years that I've been on pumps, I've had 3 different Medtronic pumps, because I think they sort of over here in the UK, we have a National Health Service, and the way that they do pumps is you get a new pump every 4 years, so the warranty lasts for 4 years. So I can't remember all the model names, but I've had like the super old Medtronic pumps that's just like a black and white screen, looks like a pager. And then the last two, I think, have been the 640G and the 670G or some models around that. But yeah, none of them have had any sort of hybrid closed loop or even talking to a sensor. And that's partly because I have tried the Medtronic sensors in the past, but like literally I tried them for 10 days and then moved straight back to using Dexcom. So I haven't utilized any of the technology that sort of linked the two together because I've much preferred the Dexcom sensors.
Okay, gotcha. This was a much bigger jump for you than for me, because I was already on automation with DIY Loop for a couple years. You reached out to me a few months ago. I guess you found some of my videos, or what was you were at some sort of crossroads. What was that crossroads? What was the decision you were trying to make?
Yeah, so I mean, I've always had pretty good control. Like throughout, I think I've been quite lucky that I've taken it quite seriously, like being diabetic. I was diagnosed at 20, so I'd kind of already had, a lot of the fun wild times. I'd had a gap year. I'd started university, so I didn't feel like I was missing out on any experiences really, and I understood it at the age of 20, like how serious it was. So I've always taken it quite seriously, and I've always had quite good control. But I spoke to my doctor, like I see them sort of once a year. And I said, like, I want to push above the sort of 75% time in range. I want the next level. Like, surely systems are starting to talk to each other now, and the CGMs and the pumps are going to start to talk to each other. What's the best one? How should I research it? And I'm lucky to have quite a forward-thinking doctor. He said, there are some commercial systems coming out now, like Omnipod 5 and like the tandem pumps. But he said, like, if you really want the biggest jump, you need to look at the DIY solutions out there. So, as I do, as a YouTuber myself, I went straight to YouTube and started searching some DIY YouTube diabetes searches. I found your channel and knew that you were pretty clued up on all the solutions that are coming out and the DIY solutions themselves. So yeah, I sort of used my my own YouTube channel to reach out to you and say, like, what would you recommend I do? These are the options that I have in the UK. Should I look at Loop? Should I look at iAPS? And then we had a call and sort of, you didn't push me in either way, but I felt like iAPS was worth looking into. And yeah, it's been only a short stint of about 2 months or so, but I really dived in head first and have been quite involved with looking at all the changes and things like that and learning about the ORF algorithm.
When it comes to the build, I feel like I had this weird experience of just someone sent me a link for a test flight app and I clicked it and I had the app. I know that's not the case for most people. How did you build the app? Did you have that happen, or did you have to like actually build it? And what was that experience like?
Yeah, I built it myself. I guess a little bit lucky. Before YouTube, I was a developer, like only for a short stint of time, for like 2 years, but enough to know how GitHub works, how TestFlight works, those kind of things. So it wasn't a huge jump for me to be able to build the app. So yeah, I did do it myself, but I can understand, like, it is difficult. You're dealing with all kinds of new terms. A lot of people will never have had a GitHub account or even know what it is, and probably don't need to know what it is. But these are the hoops that we have to jump through to be able to build a DIY solution, really.
Well, and I found though with DIY Loop, it was so well laid out, the instructions, that even though I didn't understand what I was doing it, and it really wasn't that difficult. Was that the case for this too? Like, let's say you didn't know these terms. Were the instructions laid out in a way where anyone who does their research, at least, and really, reads this stuff can kind of just figure it out pretty seamlessly?
Yeah, I think it's the exact same process as building Loop. I haven't ever built Loop, but I think the process using GitHub is exactly the same effectively. Yeah, it's as you say, it looks like a lot of gobbledygook probably to somebody, but if you just copy and paste the right things from the instructions, then it should work. And the other great thing is the community side of it. There's plenty of people on the Facebook groups, or for iAPS's side, there's the Discord where they sort of offer help with the common pitfalls of trying to build for the first time or trying to update the app.
Getting on iAPS, there's so many settings, like way more than any system I've ever come in contact with. Like DIY Loop, pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of settings with it, which is part of the reason what makes it so strong, and a lot of dynamic settings, which we'll get into. How much did you ask for from the community while getting on, or were you pretty self-reliant with getting your settings set straight?
Firstly, I had a bit of time before like my pump funding moved across to Omnipod Dash. So I ran the simulator for like 2 weeks. iAPS has like a pump simulator. I think Loop does as well, where you can still link your Dexcom readings in and you can sort of see what it would try and do if it was linked to a pump. So I got a good understanding of kind of a few scenarios, like post meal times where you carb count wrong and those kind of things, what would happen. Because I wanted to be like familiar at least with the interface and know what was going on at each situation. And then when I eventually moved across to Omnipod, I did, I think, 2 pods of Omnipod using the PDM, nothing to do with iAPS, so that I familiarized myself a bit with set changes, with the alarms, all the different things. Because again, I'd never used Omnipod before. I'd always been on a tubed pump before that. And then eventually, I moved across to iAPS, and I followed the startup guide that I think Magnus and Teresa and a couple of other community members have written onto a website. It sort of has suggestions for day 1, week 1, week 2 to 3, and then weeks 4+. And I kind of just followed their suggestions. It's almost like removing the guardrails. So like it starts with a very safe system where you're probably going to have great control overnight, where there's no carbs on board and you're not doing any exercise and things like that. But then you're probably going to spike after meals because there's so many safety systems in place, and you slowly release limits in a safe way. So yeah, a lot of reading those docs and watching the Loop and Learn sessions that Magnus and Teresa have done, and a few of the other community members. I think there was another one on sort of the algorithms. But it definitely is a bit intimidating. There's a lot of information to get through. And I think moving forward, that's something that I would love to try and help with, try and simplify the process, because like you said, it's great that you have all of this control, and hopefully that leads to excellent time and range and good control of your blood sugars. But at the same time, there's an unbelievable amount of settings and probably I imagine some concerns about changing the wrong settings and how impactful that could be in a negative way towards your control.
Yeah. I'd say, it took me at least 1 month to feel secure on it, and feel like I had some semblance of control, because my control, I feel like, wasn't as good as DIY Loop at first, because I was really just getting these settings down and figuring out what works and what didn't. And it's not as easy as taking your settings from Loop and applying them here. It doesn't work like that. Or the same coming from any other pump and using those carb ratios and insulin sensitivity factor settings and applying them, and it just works, because it's not that way. But the app is built in a way where your settings don't need to be exactly perfect, because there's all these other functions and dynamic settings that can work from what you give it and keep your glucose range in control. But you do need to keep tweaking things, and I want to get into tweaking things for sure. My first month was a little nerve-wracking. I felt secure using it. I didn't feel like my glucose levels were where I wanted them to be. But now, 3 months later, after I've made some changes myself, I'm in a place where I find it to be better than I was with DIY Loop. My time in range is not only better, but the amount of time I use the app, the user interaction has plummeted. I am looking at the app way less, making way less decisions. The only decisions I'm really making are plugging in carbs, and I'm not doing much else. What has kind of your timeline been like? Take me into that first week of iAPS, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, I mean, super similar experience, honestly. I would say the first week, my control was nowhere near as good as my previous 10 years of knowing exactly how a tubed pump works and how my body reacts to carbs and all those things. But I was expecting that. To be honest, I kind of penciled in like a few months of, you're going to have worse control for a few months. And then eventually the real hope is that your control would be, 85% plus time in range. Some of the numbers that other people in the community are getting. But I was fully willing to forget everything that I knew about diabetes and start from scratch. There are a few key settings that you really need to get right, or close to right, being like your carb ratios and your basals and how they change throughout the day, and your insulin factor or your sensitivity. And I thought I had those because I had all of those settings in my previous Medtronic pumps. But as I said to you, I think in the past, I kind of needed to relearn actually what was right, because I think you just naturally adjust to thinking, oh, this is lunch, this is how many carbs it is, but I always give a tiny bit more for lunch. These patterns build up over time, and I wanted to kind of forget everything that I thought I knew and start from scratch and, do a lot of the standard tests to work out actually what my carb ratios are, actually what my insulin sensitivity is, how much does 1 unit of insulin bring my blood sugar down if there's no carbs on board, all those kind of tests that you can do to really dial in your settings. And that I think they're things that people know that they should probably do once a year or something, but it's very easy to go 10 years in my experience with minimal changes to your settings just because you've got good control, but you're actually piling on a whole load of workload into your brain because you're constantly adapting. Yeah, this is 60 grams of carbs that I'm having for my lunch, but I always give a little bit more at lunch because I don't like spiking quite so high. And you shouldn't have to do that. You should just be able to change a setting slightly and then always give the exact right carb ratio or the exact right carb count. So yeah, I certainly had probably 2 weeks where my control was worse. Outside of nights was the biggest difference for me. Like literally, I think night 1 was amazing. And this was always my frustration with, a Medtronic tube pump or any kind of tube pump that wasn't talking to a CGM was the nights. They should be so simple. We have no carbs in play. We have no exercise going on. You're in a resting state. So it's frustrating to wake up to a hypo or a high blood sugar that isn't coming down when you just know that your pump could just give you like tiny little bits of insulin or cut your basal. Either of those would stabilize out, and you're getting CGM readings every 5 minutes. So I was always frustrated about the nights. And to be honest, because I had quite tight control, I would probably a few nights a week wake up with either an alarm for a high, which I had set relatively low, or I was, starting to go low and I needed to have a couple of sweets or something in the night. So the nights have been the biggest difference and probably the most meaningful impact to both me and my wife, like waking up to way fewer alarms nowadays. But the days have you're going to have to play with settings in a safe way and resist the urge to turn on all the dynamic functions straight away. Like the instructions kind of tell you to, they tell you you're going to have to get a week's worth of data so that it understands your TDD and lots of other things about you. Try and just change one thing
What's your
every
TDD?
Couple of days. It's around 50 units of insulin.
No, what does that stand for?
Oh, sorry. Total daily dose.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, that's been one of the nice things is my total daily dose has come down ever so slightly, and that's not surprising because I'm going hypo less. So it's cutting insulin when it sees that I'm going to be going low. So I'm using less insulin because obviously previously on the Medtronic pumps, it wouldn't be doing that. So it'd still be giving me that insulin. So yeah, insulin, my TDD has come down, but there's lots of terms that you have to come to learn when you're moving across to something like this. I'm not going to sugarcoat the fact that it is a big jump, and a lot of people that aren't doing anything DIY, like for example, my younger sister is also type 1 diabetic and has been for basically the exact same time as me. And I know that she asks me like how I'm getting on with all of this stuff, but I know that it's probably too much for her to contemplate doing right now. She likes things nice and simple, and diabetes, she likes to try and make sure it's not a huge part of her life, and that she can try and live her life to the fullest and not get controlled by all these settings. And that's where I want to get to, but I think you have to put the time in.
What you were saying about like the nighttime control, that's the biggest advantage to getting on automation is going to sleep and truly feeling secure that things will most likely be okay very consistently. A lot of people struggle with overnight lows and highs, and I so rarely have any thought going to bed like what's going to happen. And it's incredible. It's nice. And I encourage anyone listening who's not on automation, who has overnight issues, to consider any automation. It doesn't need to be iAPS. Just any automated system will help you with that. And iAPS, it is much more advanced. I don't expect it to be for everyone. You know, both you and I have an enjoyment or a history with technology, and we kind of like this stuff and geek out over it. And that's not to say people who don't can't consider this, because they can, and it's accessible, but it's okay to just stick with a system that's not iAPS and is another automated system.
At the end of the day, all of the pump companies are moving towards this future, right? It's frustratingly slow, which is why, you know, the "we are not waiting" movement has happened. But like, if it scares you, there is absolutely like no pressure to jump into one of these complicated systems if it feels overwhelming. Like there's already, we're now seeing like Omnipod 5, we're seeing the Tandem IQ stuff. Medtronic, I think, are starting to close their loop and come out with new sensors, and like all of the companies are moving towards this. So it's a great time to be diabetic, as weird as a sentence as that is to say. I can't even imagine what it was like even 20 years ago, but like we are moving towards a future where these systems talk to each other and help us with the daily difficulties of managing this disease.
Yeah, I mean, I've learned over the last couple of years about how powerful the "we are not waiting" movement is, and the origins of DIY Loop. I had someone on the podcast talking about like how it started. You know, this is like 2014, maybe a little earlier, that people were beginning to connect continuous glucose monitors to insulin pumps. This was way before Big Pharma got into it. And just now, over the last few years, Big Pharma and all the pump companies now have this closed loop. But now the next step is, you know, the DIY community is still doing it, and it's still ahead. The next step is truly making these automated systems not only where the technology talks to each other, but they're constantly adapting to your tendencies, your change in hormones, whatever that may be, and becoming more dynamic, which is why iAPS, specifically the OREF1 algorithm, which is also in iAPS, an Android automated system, which I also talked to someone on the podcast about. It's why it's so powerful. Yeah, it's exciting to see the technology exists now, and you better know that these, you know, big companies are working on it because they know it's possible, and they're also talking. There are events where they bring pharma and DIY together to inspire this change. I want to kind of get into like where you are now. How do you feel about your control right now and your time and range compared to, I guess, what it was before? Do you feel like you've gotten somewhere where you're like, oh, wow, this is an upgrade now?
I would say I've definitely seen an increase in time and range. Like I'm probably up at about 85% now, which is, yeah, probably about a 10% improvement to what I was doing on my own. It should be in the process where I'm having to interact with it a lot less, but I'm still in the tinkering stage. So I'm still, you know, obsessed with, you know, going through and trying to change something ever so slightly every 2 days, trying to learn why, you know, I get these super microboluses at some points and not others, all these quirks of the system, really just to try and understand it and increase that time and range further. But the dream is it'll be way more hands-free and just be entering carbs, maybe just playing with profiles if there's exercise or I'm about to eat or something like that. But
what is your target set to?
5.5, which is, I think, between 95 and 100 in your system. Yeah. And then I do have some temporary targets for things like exercise. But yeah, my bog standard target is 5.5, which I think is 98 or something. Yeah,
mine's around the same. I think I'm around like 90. And that's one of the things that excites me most about iAPS, and DIY Loop had this also, the ability to set such a low target. But I wake up and I look at my glucose levels, and the entire night or a lot of the night, I'm like sitting at 88, you know, around 88 to 90, which is, I guess, 5.5 to maybe 5.2 for you, like somewhere in there, which is, you're not going to get on other systems that aren't DIY.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that level of control is amazing, isn't it? It's like not being a diabetic basically through the night. But yeah, I love the fact that you can have so much control and sort of change targets based on different profiles. I don't know if you played around with any of the profiles during exercise or stress or any moments like that.
When it comes to my user interaction, and time and range, my time and range, and I'll answer your question with this. Like, so my time and range has been what it was with DIY Loop, if not a little better. So I'm around 85% also right now, but I know I can get it to be better. I just like haven't had the time. You know, you're spending all this time, as you should, and as I wish I was, changing little things every once in a while, which, by the way, you should never be changing more than one thing at a time, because you
100%.
really want to see how one thing changes your levels. If you do two things, you're not going to know which one did it. So that's really the key. And that's something I want to get into. But so I have the time and range where like in that 85% range, you know, sometimes, I mean, I am in the 90s, but overall 90 days, right? I've been on it for 3 months. That's where I'm at. My user interaction is way less than Loop, like 90% or more less. And so what that comes down to, that includes things like profiles. So with DIY Loop, I found myself more often than not putting on temp overrides, or just overrides, and giving myself fake carbs all the time. I was just like, oh, all right, I'm stuck high. I'm plugging in 15 grams of carbs because I need more insulin. Because Loop doesn't have the unannounced meal feature that iAPS has. So it really believes when you plug in carbs, it's like, okay, that's how many carbs you're having, and we're not going to assume you're having any more or less. Whereas iAPS doesn't think like that and adjusts differently. But so when it comes to profiles, it's very rare that I'm stuck high and need to put a profile on now, where I did with Loop. It's very rare that I go work out, unless there's cardio involved. Cardio involved, I put a profile on. But if I'm just going to like lift some weights, or even go on like a bit of a walk, like a somewhat strenuous walk, I haven't had to put profiles on as much as I thought I would. As much as I did with overrides, which is the equivalent for Loop. So yes, I have like 5 profiles made, but it is so rare that I use them, because it is so rare that I'm getting stuck high now, which is a huge, huge change. Like that is the biggest advancement in my life right now, is those highs that not only physically can drain you, but they can mentally drain you too. There's nothing worse than just like this like lingering high that's in the back of your mind when you're trying to like live your life or be social, you know?
Yeah, exactly. To be clear, for me, like my exercise is all cardio. I haven't lifted a weight for about 6 or 7 years, I don't think. So yeah, my profile is to set a higher temp target, and sort of turn off some of the super micro boluses and things like that. But I'm the same. Like so many things that I used to always be giving correction. I was kind of doing the equivalent when I was on a tubed pump of giving myself small micro boluses. When I was like going high, I would just be giving myself 0.3 of a unit, checking again in 15 minutes. But it's so nice just to go sort of hands-free, especially when you're out socializing, those kind of things, just knowing that there is something in the background kind of taking care of you and trying to get you back into range is an absolute game changer. So yeah, it's been a big shift for me. I think probably not as big as a shift for you, because you went from DIY Loop to iAPS, whereas I've literally gone from being the connection between my CGM and my pump to letting some of that control happen through an app. So it's been amazing, and I'm by no means an expert or even close to. I'm nowhere near a lot of the control that some people have managed to get with this. I'm still learning every day, but it's been incredible. I can't believe how quickly it's made an impact, actually. Because I was, as I said before, I was expecting to have a few months of frustration of not understanding why it wouldn't be giving me insulin, or why I was going hypo, or all those kind of things. But I think reading through the docs and watching as much content that you've put out and other members of the community has really helped my understanding and made the control what it is already. And hopefully in a year's time, maybe 90% time in range or other improvements like having to interact with the app less. There's lots of different difficulties with diabetes, and increasing your time in range isn't the goal for everybody. Some people would take 70% time in range and never having to announce carbs at all. I know there's other people that do that. I think with the amount of carbs that I eat as a runner, I would never be able to do that. I always seem to have to announce and sometimes even pre-bolus or set an eating soon sort of profile. But I'm okay with that because I was doing that anyway. And any increase to my time in range, that's the goal for me, really.
It's incredible to me that so many people are using iAPS and not pre-bolusing or logging any carbs and getting results that are, above 80%. And that is, of course, that's the goal of all of this technology. And that is a goal set for me one day to get to with this system. But currently, that's not where I am. But I want to get into some settings that, at least that I've found, that when I triggered them, when I realized the potential for them and turned them on, what happened. And I'd love to hear if there's anything specific that you kind of experienced similarly. One thing that I turned on recently, I found that there would be these rare unexplained lows. And what I found was I used the community. I reached out to some people in the community and sent a screenshot. And they saw that there were CGM readings that were like huge drops and then went back. Like these hiccups in your CGM readings, which do happen. There's a setting called smooth glucose value that I found to be helpful for this situation, where it, rather than just believing that number on iAPS, will create more of a smooth directional glucose level to get to that. So the level that will read on the app is actually different than Dexcom a little bit because it's smoothing it out a bit. And for noisy sensors, and the G7 can be noisy sometimes. It depends on the sensor.
The first 24 hours on the G7 and the G6, I found, I've turned that setting on, certainly for the first 24 hours of any sensor change, basically, because I found the same. Or if you ever, depends where you wear it, right? But if you ever lean on it, sometimes like the glucose just completely drops, and I'll look at it, and then I'll just realize that I'm lying on my arm if it's on the back of my arm or something like that. So yeah, the noisy sensors, I mean, you can't really expect an app to do much with wrong readings because that's the only information it's got to go from, hasn't it? So maybe we need to be harping on at Dexcom and companies like that to improve their sensor noise levels.
Yeah, it's actually funny. I put my Dexcom on my side abs area for the first time in a very long time, and I sleep on my side sometimes, and I was having these false lows, and I couldn't understand why. It took 2 nights of it to be like, oh yeah, I put my sensor in a spot that I can't sleep on my side right now. And that's something that's difficult. That's compression lows are difficult, I think, for them to fix. I mean, hopefully that's one day something they can fix. But I know that that's just an issue with a lot of CGMs. The other setting that I turned on that I found helpful was resistance lowers target, meaning if the app suspects that your resistance is higher, meaning insulin won't affect you as much because most likely your glucose reading is higher, the app will lower your target. And I found that once I toggle that on, my highs came down faster. And it's part of the reason why I don't get stuck on these lingering highs anymore. Those were 2 settings that I found to be really helpful for me. Are there any, and of course, none of this is medical advice. This is just my own experience and Pete's own experience. But is there anything that you found that you turned on? You were like, oh, wow, this was something that works.
Yeah, to be honest, I've pretty much followed the guide on the website to a T. Waited 7 days before turning on any dynamic settings and all those kind of things. And I never saw huge changes overnight because I was only changing one thing at a time. And actually the biggest difference to me, as I alluded to earlier, was changing things like my carb ratios, just like misconceptions of actually what my carb ratios were, from like 12 years of the same settings effectively. Obviously they had changed over the 12 years, but like I changed them by 0.5 every 6 months when I think about the fact that, I always go high after lunch or some equivalent. So for me, it was actually just those core settings, like carb ratios or your insulin sensitivity. It was just slight changes in those that made the biggest difference to me. And outside of that, I haven't really played with any of the advanced settings. I've just kind of stuck to what the beginner guide does. I did set up a whole load of new things that I'd never used before. Things like Night Scout. I'd never used Night Scout before. I was always wondering, why do people, want to use this website to see that? Why don't they just use Dexcom? But the ability to do some of the analysis through reports, there's like a loopalizer report that you can generate, and you can sort of see basal rates, certainly overnight, if you're getting too much insulin, where the pump is sort of suspending your basal, or if it's having to constantly give you more basal. You can learn a lot from things like that I'd never experienced before. And I think just one of the side effects of me getting more and more involved in the DIY space is learning, God, there's a lot of really smart people here that know what they're talking about and have been helping others for years. And don't be scared to reach out in the Facebook groups or in the Discord and sort of ask about certain situations. I mean, always do the work up front of learning and researching and searching as much as you can. But I certainly have relied on others in the community to help with certain questions that I've had around exercise. Actually, there wasn't much I could find about sort of long distance running with iAPS or any OREF based algorithm. There were a few like blog posts and things like that, but I wanted to ask others' experience, and I just posted in the Discord about, does anyone else do sort of marathon training or ultra marathons or anything like that? And there was a bunch of people that offered their experiences and what they did. Did they run fasted? Did they set temp profiles? How many carbs were they eating an hour whilst they were running? Like all these things. And it's just been nice, I think, to get a bit more involved in like a diabetic community, because I've always sort of shied away from that side of things. And just being able to hang out with a bunch of other users that want to push for the best control that they have, or are fed up of waiting for the commercial systems to catch up. It's been nice just to be able to talk with others and hear about their experiences as well. And I guess that's what eventually led me to your channel as well. And now these catch-ups that we get to have.
Yeah. Before we get into the future of iAPS and its current version too, because there's some stuff to talk about there.
Yeah.
I want to just like real quick talk about food. Are there any types of foods that you found that you're eating now and you're like, oh, wow, I can eat this no problem. This is crazy. Is there anything that you've experienced that with?
To be totally honest with you, Justin, I've always eaten what I wanted. I've never let diabetes tell me that I can't have a whole of a large pizza. If I feel like eating a large pizza, I'll eat it and I'll deal with the consequences of a high blood sugar. But the control changed. Yeah, I mean, pizza's a funny one. Pizza's like a staple for me. Like probably every other week I'm having a pizza takeaway at some point. And it's always been difficult to deal with in diabetes. And I had it nailed. I had the exact recipe nailed for my old tubed system, sort of a long dual bolus, over 2 hours, slowly giving you more and more insulin. And I kind of got the carbs down, and then obviously moving to a system where there is no like dual wave or, give me more insulin later. There are some settings with like fats and proteins to delay extra insulin, but I haven't really got into the weeds with that. So that's been like a good yardstick for me, is like, can I eat a pizza with my current settings? If not, then I need to keep diving in further and further. But no, I've never really let my diabetes control too much about what I eat. I probably would have better control if I was, more conscious of avoiding bagels and things like that. But I'm too hungry of a person to ever consider not eating a whole bagel or not eating a whole pizza.
Yeah, and I mean, ultimately, the goal and the reason we use technology like this is to eat whatever we want. And,
exactly.
And I don't limit the foods I eat, and I really encourage other people to, feel free to eat what they want and find the technology that helps them control it. And I found that there are certain foods that I didn't not eat before. I ate them, but then I was stuck high for a while that I'm eating now and I'm not. Specifically, I don't eat it often, but fast food. I'm using the same carb count that I would get on Google or from their menu that I would use during Loop. And iAPS I'm not even going over 200 sometimes. Like I'm not even going high. I'm just getting going up and then coming right back down. Bagels have been like my worst enemy and then my favorite food. Bagels are not bringing me high or getting stuck high. It's amazing. But I have noticed that pretzels still really mess me up. And I don't know what it is about pretzels, but there's like almost no way for me to eat pretzels. And I eat them, but they don't make me happy. And I haven't figured those out.
Somebody in the comments let Justin know how you deal with a pretzel.
Please and thank you. All right, I think we should get into the future of iAPS because unfortunately there has been a little drama in the community of iAPS where there are kind of two parties. One party that continues to push iAPS forward and has combined a few of the branches. When you're developing apps, there's usually a few branches, right? For safety reasons, there's like an alpha, a dev, and then the main. And before it gets to main, you really want to test everything out in these two other branches. But there has been like a merge of branches, and I believe there's only a dev and a main. And another party feels like where the app is going and how it's being led isn't very transparent, open source, or potentially not even safe for people like us, maybe even getting on it just from the start. We've been in it for a little time, so we may be a little ahead on this stuff. But just for someone coming in now, there's a bit of just like instability that's important to at least comment on. I think it's unfortunate that this is happening in this way. I don't know enough to really comment on like what people are, if something's right or wrong. But what I can say is I'm on version 2.3.3. The app has now moved to 3.0.3, and I'm following the guidelines of what the iAPS Facebook group has been saying, which is don't update yet. We don't feel it's safe. And I don't feel comfortable or confident doing that just yet because of what they're saying. I don't feel comfortable updating. But then there's the side of me that also feels uncomfortable not updating because what if the iPhone gets an update? Is the app that I'm on going to be stable? And what if it's not and needs to be updated? I'm kind of at this really uncomfortable point in my iAPS journey, and I don't quite feel comfortable even really telling people to consider it. What are your thoughts on what's going on right now?
Yeah, I think you've done a good job summarizing it, and you're obviously in a difficult position where you're never promoting anything, right? You're trying to educate as much as possible, but naturally people are going to want to learn about what you're using and what gets you such great control. And iAPS is in a bit of a weird situation now where it doesn't feel particularly open source. And I've witnessed that in the Discord as well, that there seems to be, not a whole lot of community built features or discussions about what we should do. It seems to more be led by the lead dev and how he sees the future of iAPS. And on the safety side of things, I used to, before YouTube, I used to do some developer work myself. By no means an expert, but I did it for a couple of years. And typically you would have sort of releases at various levels of stability. So you might have an alpha or a beta and a release candidate, and they're slowly getting tested by more and more people. So you're ironing out as many bugs as possible, because when you're developing an app on your phone, it might well work for you in your language, on your exact iPhone model, in various other restrictions, but it's impossible to test it on everybody's location. There's so many variables basically. So you need to test with as many people as possible. And typically in software, open source software especially, that involves either different branches, like you mentioned, like a dev branch that people, more advanced users, can jump into testing and use for months maybe, to really make sure that they've covered all the different bugs that could live there, or through different releases, like a release candidate, which more and more people can test before the main version gets updated, and that's what everyone will actually be able to update to, hopefully safely. Inevitably, there's always like very, very minor bugs that get fixed when you push to main, because you're going from like 10% of people testing to 100% of people using it. But the concerns are that these pushes are happening without a lot of peer review, a lot of other people checking the code, a lot of testing. There were some features, I think, that were pushed to version 3 that were literally developed a couple of days before and pushed to the dev branch. So there's just not enough testing. So I completely side with, a lot of the community, and the concerns that I've seen on the Facebook group of people saying that it's not well tested and not advising to update. From a personal perspective, I have updated since then, just because I wanted to try out the new bolus calculator that was in the dev branch for a long time. I personally haven't had issues with the latest version 3, but I would not, if I was speaking to my own sister, I would not advise her to update. I'm happy to take on that risk because I feel like I have a good understanding now, and I have a lot of backups in case the app breaks. I don't leave my house that much as a YouTuber, so I have insulin easily available, I have sugar easily available, and I like to be on sort of the cutting edge. But I do absolutely agree that there needs to be better structure put in place for the testing and for the releasing. I completely agree with that, to be honest with you. So it is sad that this kind of drama has come about just as me and you have got onto the app. But yeah, I think a lot of the people that you have spoken to in the past on the podcast, involved with iAPS, they have their hearts and their heads in the right place in terms of wanting to make sure that we are not waiting, but at the same time, we're being safe about how we release apps.
Yeah, we are not waiting, but we're also going to be smart about this and safe about this. The good news is that I've spoken to people within, specifically Teresa, who is on one of my iAPS podcast episodes, and she says that they are working with Night Scout now to create a branch of iAPS that can continue on in the safer manner for people like myself who want to keep using iAPS but don't necessarily feel comfortable or confident in its current leadership and direction. They are looking for developers, iOS developers. If you're listening and you have some time, you want to help people with type 1 diabetes have better control, I highly consider you speaking with them. I have the iAPS Facebook group link down in the description. And, it really saddens me that this is happening, because I feel like both you and I and so many other people have really, truly experienced what the power of iAPS and what the future of control of type 1 will look like with algorithms and technology. And it's here right now and available and somewhat safe, but it stinks that I can't be like to someone, yeah, go check it out. Like, I don't feel comfortable saying that.
It's like a sliding scale, isn't it? Like, people will have a different amount of risk that they're willing to take on. Like, none of these DIY solutions are completely risk-free, as much as we'd like to say that they're well tested. That is the exact reason why the commercial options are behind, because they have to go through so much testing to get their approval to be sold in America, in Europe. There has to be rigorous testing done to make sure that none of them fail, none of them are going to accidentally give you insulin when you don't need it, because that is a hell of a lawsuit if that ever comes about. So there is a sliding scale of risk, and it's about where you sit on that ladder. But I think most people will agree that we should at least be following the best practices of open source software release. When I was a developer, we worked on like websites that not that many people used, and we had really rigorous tests before we could release any code to the public effectively. So it seems kind of strange to not have that in place for a system that is literally deciding whether or not to give you insulin. Obviously, there's no commercial aspect behind here. This is community based, and like a lot of the people that have built iAPS to where it is today have poured in probably thousands of hours of work. And you've got to be grateful for that. But I think safety is paramount, and hopefully there is a future where iAPS continues and is released in a safe way. And I'd love to be involved in that. I'm having discussions with the same people that you're talking to. So even if it's not from a dev perspective, because I'm a little bit rusty on that front, if it's writing guides, if it's helping in the Discord, if it's whatever it is, and hopefully there's a future where it's released and developed and improves month by month, with an active community of developers and people helping.
Yeah, I think that this community is amazing. Hearing you say you're getting involved. I love doing this and educating, and I've met so many people who just want to help advance the technology and help others. It's incredible. Pete, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling me about your experience. And I look forward to seeing kind of where iAPS goes and continuing to talk to you on Discord when there's drama.
Absolutely. I enjoy listening to this podcast whenever I can jump on to talk about something, even if it's nothing to do with apps, if it's just to do with exercise or whatever, I'm happy to. But really appreciate all the content that you're putting out there. It's great.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. Be sure to listen to that episode where I spoke to the two iAPS admins about the algorithm and how it works. Links to that are in the description. And remember, iAPS is experimental. It is not approved by the FDA or regulatory authorities. You take full responsibility for building and using iAPS, and you do so at your own risk. Always consult with your doctor before making changes to your treatment. New episodes of this podcast release every Monday wherever you listen and on YouTube. There's a link to my YouTube channel and social accounts in today's show notes. If you have feedback on the episode and you're watching on YouTube, be sure to drop a comment and subscribe. I'm Justin, and I'll see you next week.